Hello and welcome to my talk for All About That Place. I'm Dr. Roger Hansford. My topic for the leisure and entertainment theme is British music and literature of the 19th century. I undertook a PhD in musicology at the University of Southampton from 2010 to 2013, supervised by Professor Janice Brooks and Professor Mary Hammond, and fully funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. I would describe my light bulb moment early in the course and the discoveries that followed in the decades since. This talk gives an overview of how to generate original research content and the ways you can share your findings in different academic formats. Back in 2010, little work had been undertaken by historians to discover British music of the 19th century. Most of the composers made famous by history, such as Chopin, Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, Brahms, and Liszt, were from Europe, not Britain. There was even a famous saying that Britain at that time was the land without music. However, there was awareness of a music manuscript archive at London's British Library, as well as extant music collections at country houses across the UK. While much musicological research had already dealt with large-scale public works, such as Victorian-era concert performances and operas, little had been done on music in the home. My idea was to visit archives to research domestic songs of the early 19th century, finding and analysing songs on different themes. I would then place these in context by reading 19th century literature that commented on domestic musicianship. There was a trend at the time for interdisciplinary research, meaning that researchers would adopt methods from two or more different disciplines at once. Quite a few had investigated the ways that realist novels, for example by Thomas Hardy or George Eliot, employed music as a literary device, writing about it to shape their plot and characters. Instead, I looked at the little-known genre of romance fiction, more of a fantasy genre, by the likes of Anne Radcliffe and Sir Walter Scott. And I was able to link its commentary on music with my musical analysis of many songs. My background as a writer and musician was essential for this work. I found that 19th century Britain, in fact, was a land full of music. At my PhD viva, when I was made a doctor, my examiners encouraged me to publish my thesis. I re-edited my text, adding an additional chapter, and was delighted when Ashgate, later becoming Taylor and Francis, and Routledge, accepted my work. I had submitted to Ashgate on seeing a Twitter post saying they sought manuscripts. So my 3 years of hard work became a hardback book, also known as a monograph, in their Music in 19th Century Britain series. I'm very grateful to my editors, Laura Macy and Professor Bennett Zon. Comparing parlour songs and romance novels of 1790 to 1850, I found that a series of imaginative figures, including fairies, witches, and ghosts, plus musical minstrels, were thematic and appeared in both art forms. During this period, there was a growth in print culture due to economic and technological changes that favoured the early publishing industry. There was also improved reader education and greater access to reading materials through bookstalls and circulating libraries. The minstrel, traditionally a poet and musician employed to entertain the aristocracy and royalty of medieval times, was representative of the early 19th century social changes that fared greater consumption of print materials for bourgeois leisure pursuits. While audiences maintained an amused fascination with supernatural figures and the occult in songs and stories, there were also numerous Christian figures that represented contemporary debates about religion in Britain, as the new freedoms of the printing press were negotiated in moral terms. Finally, I examined the evidence from print culture that domestic musical practice celebrated the romantic ideal of singing, utilising the figure of the siren in the guises of mermaids and nightingales. My research drew upon a number of academic theoretical approaches that influenced my methodology. I was inspired by postmodernist theories of readership, in which meanings can move between culture and text, and can also be defined in part by readers themselves. I worked with well-known or canonical texts, alongside less well-known or non-canonical texts, reflecting the way that print materials were consumed, or they are enjoyed as part of a discourse, rather than in isolation. The audience for the novels and songs was nationally defined, an English-speaking or Anglophone audience, whose consumption was organised around a common set of imaginative figures. Based on the work of Raymond Williams, I argued that literary anecdotes discovered during my research could challenge previously dominant historical narratives, providing counter-histories of Romantic culture. A postmodernist approach, with the emphasis on interpretive readings of texts, also meant that fictional works, alongside musical texts, could be used to inform my understanding of British cultural history. I showed how the romance novels intersected with musical culture, even serving to model domestic musical performance or to theorise the distribution patterns of newly published song editions. When novel readers also sang and played in the drawing room, they could follow the examples of novel characters they had encountered in the fiction. Such interactions constitute what is known as an intersectional culture. Intersection is a term I will come back to shortly. I'm delighted to have achieved a monograph and pleased that my book was marketed through Amazon, as well as Waterstones and Blackwell's booksellers. 2 years after the initial hardback publication, my book sold enough copies to be produced as a paperback, and it is also available as a Kindle edition. By the time I had delivered research papers at specialist academic conferences around the UK, I was also ready to hold a concert. This took place in 2019, entitled All Jubilant with Song. Several of the items I had discovered at the British Library were performed by the soprano Anne Dent. I was lucky enough to entertain a packed audience at this event, with ticket sales raising £1,000 for the Church of the Blessed Mary in Upham, Hampshire, where the concert and talk was held. It was the first time many of the songs had been performed to live audiences since the Victorian era, showcasing the work of composers including Matthew Cook, Charles Dibdin, Stephen Storris, and John Wall Calcott. Also in 2019, my monograph received an excellent review by Melissa Dixon of the University of Birmingham. This was published in the journal Modern Language Review, describing my methodology as one that put music and literature firmly within the context of British material culture. Dixon writes, Hansford's book is impressively researched, making extensive use of the song collections of the British Library, and it is both unusual and skillful in its combination of detailed musical analysis with close readings of literature texts. Her review states that my monograph is structured using moments of thematic intersection between the two art forms, and says it establishes that songs and romance novels shared well-to-do domestic spaces of the early 19th century. Dixon concludes that Figures of the Imagination is both impressive in its scholarship and a pleasurable read, paving the way for future research into this little studied historical moment. My monograph publication led to further online contributions. Routledge Romanticism enables online access for subscribers to individual published book chapters, and each section is searchable by notable figure, theme, time period, and British region. As an author, I gave the publisher permission to include my work, and I indexed my text to inform the search outcomes. Even non-subscribers can select a chapter of the book to read its individual abstract, increasing its accessibility. My work appears in this resource alongside the wider discourse of Romantic textual scholarship. Another contribution I made was a methodology article, theorising intersectional approaches, just as I had worked with music and literature for undergraduate students working across the arts. The article was published in Filament Journal, hosted by the University of Sydney. It defines artistic intersection, addressing the postmodernist context for criticism, and theorises chains of intersections in Romantic print culture. Influenced by theories of reception, or artistic influence, I termed this cultural phenomenon received intersection, and suggested how future musico-literary research might extend the study. Moving on from investigating national song circulation, I became interested in 19th century provincial music. This is an under-researched area, as many histories are based largely on capital cities. Philip Klitz, who lived from 1805 to 54, was a composer and musician in my hometown of Southampton. On searching the British Library archives for scores of his music, I was shocked to find 2 songs that, to modern ears, are racially prejudicial and represent a local manifestation of the blackface minstrelsy craze which emanated from the USA. I was lucky enough to be funded to research this key historical moment by the 2020 Stephen Copley Research Award from the British Association for Romantic Studies. The resulting article has been made open access, and it's the first one in the Journal of Victorian Culture to include live musical recordings. These feature my own piano renditions to highlight and stand against the way Klitz employed Orientalist compositional devices to illustrate cruel black caricatures in the lyrics. My next project will see me act as guest editor for an edition of 19th Century Music Review, focusing on music, domesticity, and British identity. Themed according to topics as broad as economics, the legal system, health, technology, politics, education, and nationalism. The articles for this journal will together address the way that parlour music, treated intersectionally with other arts and pastimes, was a dynamic interface between the public and private aspects of 19th century lifestyles. The proposed special issue of the journal, with publication planned for 2026, will constitute an original study of the way domestic arts often looked beyond the home to address civic or national concerns for British citizens who are living in a century of significant change. This brief outline describes my journey from graduate student to a published author and a contributor to journal articles published by the university presses of Oxford and Cambridge. This has required tenacity, careful scholarship, and the willingness always to take the next step. I have been lucky enough to enjoy academic funding, family support, and editorial encouragement along the way. Thank you to my hosts, the Society for Genealogists, and I'm delighted to be a part of All About That Place 2024. Thank you.